All right, we're in for a doozy. You saw the name before you clicked on it. Truly Evil Human Experiments, the stick figure video. This is by Chat History. I just checked, so you can't tell me I'm wrong. You know, there's been a lot of fascination now with like the dark side of history. It really has always been around. You know, the History Channel really started us off with that conspiracy theory kick where they started advertising conspiracy theories at the same level as real theories, and they did not differentiate. They did entire segments on alien stuff, and then at the end would be like, it might be evidence, it might not, it's all speculative. And I am thoroughly convinced it's because of the heinous shit that we've actually done. They need to find a way to try to cover it up. So instead of telling you you're wrong, they just say everything might be true. So here we go. Let's check it out. There's a couple of these that I'm thinking of myself, like the Tuskegee Institute, but we'll get into stuff a little bit later.
Evil Human Experiments.
Here we go.
All right, fellas, let's start things off a little easy. Back in the 4th century BC, Greek civilization was reaching new heights.
Man.
People were getting more and more curious about the world around us and began asking really important questions. What does that do? How does that work? Should I do a Did I leave the oven on? How do magnets work? She called me back. Is this real? Or is this just fantasy? Does any really of this real?
Funny enough, I saw like the worm thing on there. So something about worms, but we didn't figure out how worms worked for like a really long time.
Or not. All pretty valid questions for people just wishing to learn the workings of the natural world. While many focus on the mechanics of the universe, others chose to focus on the inner workings of humans themselves. And not only from a philosophical standpoint. Sometimes you just want to know what makes us tick.
What's on the inside?
That's what Greek physician Herophilus wanted to find out and document in detail. After getting his education at the Hippocratean medical school in Greece, Herophilus turned his bulging eyes towards the city of Alexandria, Egypt, with its big, throbbing library chock full of scrolls just begging to be read. Time to go to Egypt, he said. And so he did. After getting himself established and taking on a student, a young physician named Erasistratus, they got to work. Together, the two men would begin to carve out a new branch of science, anatomy. But in order to do so, you need some bodies to cut open to start slopping their guts around. And what better way to obtain fresh bodies than to use condemned criminals, captured and supplied by the Alexandrian rulers.
Oh, Lord.
Little Hero and Era were like kids in a candy store with a hopeful glimmer in their eyes, excited to begin their wondrous experiments. But surely the criminals put under the knife were already past their expiration date, right?
No, bro. You know, I'm just thinking about how little rights that criminals have now. You would be surprised. Like, even though they had a pretty organized judicial system, it really wasn't, how would you say, flushed out. It was kind of just like all willy-nilly, based on a lot of vibing, bro. You had to pass a vibe test. These men, unfortunately.
Nope. Instead, Hero and Era performed live human dissections called vivisections to broaden their understanding of the human body.
But why?
They even went as far as to perform these surgeries in full view of the public for anyone who thought it would be cool and interesting.
Oh, wow.
That's both cool and interesting. That's what I'm saying. Herophilus documented their findings in extreme detail, making breakthrough discoveries of the human anatomy. In doing so, he inflicted unimaginable suffering to his subjects. Since anesthetics weren't really a thing back then, the victims felt every cut and slice, at least until they passed out from the pain or died of blood loss. Dissecting intestines, reproductive organs, eyes, or even purposefully damaging the motor nerves to inflict paralysis. It was basically a big game of, what does this button do?
But there was no laughing.
In the end, Hero and Era's findings over 40 years of vivisections were revolutionary for the medical world. Especially since human dissection would be outlawed shortly after their work was completed. It wouldn't be until 1800 years later that performing human dissections would be a medically acceptable practice again. But like, you know, on dead people? Their work was stored in the renowned Library of Alexandria, but they were lost in the Great Fire a few hundred years later.
Bro, he added that in just for shits and giggles. Like, yeah, they cut up a lot of alive people, and they felt the cutting of being alive. Which, by the way, when my brain hears things like that, I completely shut down. I don't process that information in detail at all. And I know some of you probably do, and I'm absolutely sorry about it. I am so sorry.
Project 4.1 was actually a side project proposed immediately after the deployment of Castle Bravo, a high-yield thermonuclear bomb that was dropped in 1954 by the United States.
Okay.
Bravo was part of Operation Castle, a series of other high-yield nuclear tests with the goal of establishing superiority over the Soviet Union. The Marshall Islands, a remote Pacific group of islands, served as ground zero for the detonation of the nuclear weapons. Castle Bravo was the strongest detonation and surprisingly produced 2.5 times the expected explosive yield, resulting in an explosive force equivalent to 15 megatons of TNT. To put that into perspective, that is 1,000 times the explosive force of the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan in the final days of World War II. Like, goddamn. To make matters worse, the Marshall Islands were occupied with citizens. So US officials were kind of like, sir, shouldn't we get those people out of the... Bless you. Thanks, sir. Allergies are bothering me all day. Must be the radiation, right? No, but seriously, are we gonna get those people out of the radiation zone? Yeah, you know, that was on my to-do list. Well, too late now, so let's just see how things turn out. Operation Castle was quickly amended with the addition of Project 4.1. This new section aimed to study the human response to significant radiation exposure. You know, as if tens of thousands of victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't evidence enough. Commander of the U.S. Naval Medical Corps, Eugene Cronkite, was in charge of the project and swore everyone involved to absolute secrecy because he thought the public wouldn't be too keen on the whole test nuclear radiation on non-consenting people thing. Overall, 239 Marshallese residents were exposed to significant levels of radiation and began showing signs of radiation poisoning a few days later. Symptoms included loss of hair and significant skin damage with weeping wounds, although the wounds did heal rather quickly. Immediate observations ceased after 75 days with the conclusion that no long-term effects were likely. But just out of curiosity, regular checkups were performed on the residents for years after. Women saw increases in miscarriages and stillbirths, and newborns that survived experienced developmental difficulties,
birth defects,
and a disproportionate development of thyroid cancer.
Oh, look, man, I knew he was going to say it, but I didn't want to hear it, man. What a terrible thing, man. Oh, jeez, what a terrible, awful thing. Wait, this is actually horrific.
In addition, about 1/3 of those exposed had developed significant tumors by 1974, 20 years after Operation Castle commenced. In the following years, Marshallese representatives spoke out against the United States with accusations that the scope of the experiment was premeditated and intentional, to which the U.S. officials responded, nuh-uh.
Wow. Not surprised. And I've heard of this before, but it's an interesting thing to be reintroduced to information that you know, you just don't interact with on a regular basis, because I have this like eerie familiarity with the information being presented. And it's like everything he says that's terrifying, to the cancer, the hair loss, them not knowing, them having a chance to evacuate and not, it being intentional. You know, even like the 1/3 stat is pretty familiar to me. And it's like, I just can't put my thumb on it, you know? I can't put my thumb on the details, but I know that there's just like a terrible backstory. This is kind of hard because, like, what am I supposed to do with this information now that I have it in my brain currently? I don't know, but let's keep filling it.
During the early years of the Soviet Union, it wouldn't be uncommon for political opponents to quickly fall ill with a strong case of the death at the hands of poison. In fact, it was quite an effective and discreet way to silence any and all opposition without causing too much of a stir. Well, besides the public reacting to mysterious deaths. And that is why we must rise up against... Oh, look at that. They got another one. So how were the Soviets so good at developing successful poisons?
Make good the poison.
Run preliminary trials on living subjects, of course. In 1921, a year before the Soviet Union officially formed, the Kamera was established. This was the Soviet Secret Service's poison laboratory. Here, new deadly poisons were developed and tested on human subjects. Those tested were prisoners from the gulags, various labor camps built around the country for anyone who even had a fleeting thought that wasn't approved by the Soviet Union. Carry on. The ultimate goal of the camera was to devise a poison that was not only lethal, but undetectable. It would be colorless, tasteless, odorless, and untraceable in an autopsy. Prisoners would be unknowingly administered various test poisons, which were disguised as medication. For me, if it isn't an orange Flintstone vitamin, I don't trust it. The various poisons
that is a hilarious statement.
Tested included ricin, which causes severe internal distress and suffering, cyanide, which can cause violent seizures and heart attacks, and curare, a potent muscle relaxant that makes you painfully choke to death.
Damn.
In the end, the tests were pretty successful. For the Soviet Union, not for the prisoners. Research led to innovative ways to discreetly dispatch a target, from deploying a cyanide mist to making an assassination look like a heart attack. But the blue ribbon winner was the concoction known as C2, carbolamine choline chloride, which was basically liquid depression. Exposure to this sucker sparked a very curious reaction. Instead of a violent telltale "I've been poisoned" type death, the victim would simply become weak with a rapid decline in health, all while maintaining a calm and silent demeanor. Death occurred within 15 minutes. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian officials have claimed that the camera has been disestablished and abandoned. Yeah, sure.
I'm about to say, now you know we don't believe that shit. So you're telling me there's a depression drug that kills you from depression, but in like 20 minutes? Oh, hell. Then why is Boeing out here shooting people? If they have such good poisons, why are they doing such obvious killings? Let's watch another. Syphilis. Yeah, this is fucked up.
Now, you may have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was an unethical medical study funded by the United States Public Health Service in 1932, which involved the study of nearly 400 African-American men who had naturally contracted syphilis.
Hey, thanks for saying it, because I just saw another clip too. I refuse to put the video up either because they would not say the races of the people involved in the experiments. Like, the creator went out of their way to like edit it out and just talk about like the patients and all that kind of stuff. But the reason it matters is at that time in history, when we're targeting different groups, that context matters for the motivations of those groups when you teach that information. So yeah, I'm talking about it, stopping on the one that I know the most about. But like when they did ones overseas about, about Europeans and all that, they also wouldn't talk about that. And that's so important that you know regionally what's going on when you teach this stuff.
The goal was to observe the effects of the disease when left untreated in African-American males. Even though penicillin, an antibiotic cure for syphilis, eventually became widely available to the public, the afflicted men were intentionally never cured. Fucked up, right? Well, the U.S. decided to outdo themselves with the Guatemalan syphilis experiment. In 1946
thank you. I couldn't wait to get into it. Damn, you're good.
5,500 Guatemalan natives, including children, were involved in the experiment against their will, with the Guatemalan government granting access to the unwilling patients in hospitals, mental institutions, and even orphanages. Around 1,300 relatively healthy individuals ages 10 to 72 were intentionally infected with syphilis and even gonorrhea. Transmission was either done by direct bacterial contact into wounds or by sexual transmission with infected native sex workers, which were funded by the US government, by the way, the latter of which proved to be a very effective method of infection. The guy in charge of these experiments was Dr. John C. Cutler.
He picked the most villainous fucking picture of this dude.
Dr. Dickass.
Thank you, Dickass.
He often failed to keep accurate medical records of his experiments and instead would only provide anecdotal evidence in his findings, probably because he knew what he was doing was unethical, which very much sounds like something only a Dickass would do.
It does. Thank you.
But all joking aside, the experiments conducted on these people were gruesome. Perhaps one of the most notable documented examples of what these people experienced was about a female patient named Berta. The following is an excerpt from that document.
All right, I hope you're ready.
Berta was a female patient in the psychiatric hospital. In February 1948, Berta was injected in her left arm with syphilis. A month later, she developed scabies. Several weeks later, Dr. Cutler noted that she had also developed red bumps where he had injected her arm, lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin was beginning to waste away from her body. Berta was not treated for syphilis until 3 months after her injection. Soon after, on August 23rd, Dr. Cutler wrote that Berta appeared as if she was going to die, but he did not specify why. That same day, he put gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of Berta's eyes, as
Oh
well as
my
her private
God!
areas. He also reinfected
Oh my
her with
God!
syphilis. Several days later, Berta's eyes were filled with pus from the gonorrhea, and she was bleeding from her private area. 3 days later, on August 27th, Berta died.
Oh, this is, oh man, oh wow, that casted a dark cloud over this video. These are things that we already knew at this time. We know that happens already. We're gaining nothing from this study. There's nothing else to be learned from this.
He was a dick ass. The overall goal of the study was to determine the effectiveness of penicillin in preventing the STDs. Dr. Cutler had allegedly finalized his reports in 1955, but no evidence was ever found proving that the reports were submitted for peer review or even published. So, out of all of that suffering, nothing of medical value
I told you, man.
Though, I will say in some glimmer of fairness, a treatment program was established by the United States and made available to the affected Guatemalan population, but only half were reported to actually have received treatments with a questionable quality of care. United States President Barack Obama formally apologized to the Guatemalan government in 2010, 62 years after the study was performed.
Shit.
Yeah, that last one was quite the doozy,
Yeah,
huh?
buddy.
Well, buckle up, because it's about to get way worse. See this right here? This is Unit 731.
I don't know if I can do more of
It was
this.
home to some of the most notorious and truly evil war crimes committed by the Japanese in World
Oh,
War II.
God,
which are
come on!
definitely up there with some of the worst in the history of mankind. Unit 731 served as a lethal human experimentation and biological weapons laboratory during the Second Sino-Japanese War between China and Japan, which ran concurrent to most of the events of World War II. This nightmare facility was established in 1935 in the sub-provincial Chinese city of Harbin, 4 years after Japanese forces invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria. Inside, hundreds of thousands of Chinese and even some Russian prisoners of war were subjected to some of the most egregious and horrifying human experimentations known to man. Experiments performed on men, women, and children, which is everyone. Those chosen for experimentation were dehumanized and referred to as maruta, or logs, rather than as people, because the cover-up story for Unit 731 was that.
Yeah, it also helps when people are doing these dehumanizing things to people that they don't refer to them as names. There was a people first movement, especially like communications that I've done a lot in, obviously. And then like public works. We try to always humanize. It's something that we also did during the Iraq War. When we were sending our troops overseas, we're having them take their goggles and masks off so we could see their faces to kind of humanize the efforts, right? But in communications and in public works, we make sure to always try to humanize the subjects. So use them less often, use names. Don't use it, right, as like items. And also, that's why you see a lot of tactics when people attack each other. Name calling is always effective. It's an effective means to dehumanize the subject, you know? So whenever you're listening to something and it's got that dehumanizing air to it, always have a red flag of caution. Never really try to buy into it. Try to really shield yourself from the emotional responses that are necessary to make that work, and try to find the, the merit in the things that they're trying to say. And then always, if you can do it, humanize it, and then go back through it, because and a lot of times humanizing it makes it a lot more sensible. Always make sure you talk to people. You know, how a lot of people talk to me about how I talk to the camera and I talk to you guys individually, and you guys like how I talk to people, my people out there, because that's who you are. You know, you aren't just like sitting there watching me on the camera. You're people out there. I'm also taking a break so I can finish the vid because I'm horrified. Are you ready? Let's do it.
Noted that the vast majority of the experiments in the facility were carried out to fulfill morbid curiosity, with those performing or overseeing the studies described as merely playing. A testimony from a Japanese professor who witnessed the studies was quoted saying that some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of medicine. There is such a thing as professional curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing and studying beheadings? None at all. That was just playing around. Professional people, too, like to play.
Wow.
So basically experiments were like, I wonder what would happen if we just hucked a grenade at a guy. Bang. Oh look, he exploded.
Wow.
Hey, can I go home now? Gee, I wonder if this large heavy object will crush this guy. Yup. Will this guy freeze to death if I freeze him to death? Wow, who would have guessed? A lot of these experiments were designed to test the absolute limits of the human body. Tests included depriving victims of food or water to see how long they could survive, placing victims in low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped from their skulls, injecting victims with animal blood, hanging victims upside down until death, or even draining victims of blood just to study blood loss limits. Some victims were even dehydrated in front of large hot fans to the point of mummification.
Wow.
At the time of death, they only weighed 20% of their initial body weight. Perhaps one of the worst examples I've read was the forced pregnancy of female victims. The mothers were injected with various diseases and drugs just to see how they affected the unborn child, sometimes performing a vivisection, cutting the fetus out of the mother for examination. There's honestly so many more gruesome experiments that I just can't get into here, so if you are curious, I would encourage you to look them up.
I'm alright.
But it's like legit.
No, I would like legitimately not suggest that. You really don't need to. You just don't. Like, there are some things you don't need to be exposed to. That's enough, I think.
You've been warned. By the end of the war, as Soviet forces were closing in, Japanese officials had all remaining prisoners executed and the entirety of Unit 731 hastily demolished to destroy any remaining evidence of the program's existence. The United States had discovered trace evidence and pressured Japanese officials into spilling the beans, under threat that they would be handed over to Soviet officials for trial and punishment if they did not cooperate. Once the US learned the full extent of the horrors of Unit 731, all of those involved were swiftly brought to trial and executed for their crimes. Except, no. They actually weren't.
I was getting ready
to say
that.
The United States claimed that the data collected from the inhumane atrocities was actually pretty valuable.
I was about to say, there's no way that they try in the as an affront to the Soviet Union. There's no way. I was like, I was getting ready to call so much bullshit on that. I'm like, yeah, bro, we're about to Google.
It is otherwise ethically unobtainable through conventional means. As such, many of those involved were granted immunity and freedom in exchange for the data. The deal was struck, and the United States kept everything under lock.
Bro, we did everything to try to undermine the Soviet Union. Like, literally everything.
The Soviet Union, however, pursued trials against the top military leaders and scientists from Unit 731. In the end, only 12 individuals were tried and sentenced to several years in labor camps.
Wow, that's it.
Although the United States repeatedly denied that Unit 731 ever existed.
Click here for happier thoughts. It's the part 2 of human experiments. Yeah, man, we'll do some thinking before we release that video. Sorry about that. I was curious myself, and it was a mistake. I will see you guys in the next video. It will actually be a happier one. I'll see y'all around.